My mother screamed, "Don't touch me," at my 9-year-old daughter for trying to give her a hug. So I took her house, her reputation, and her golden son's future. And all she could do was watch as her perfect world turned to ash. Her face when she realized she had no power left. That's a memory I'll treasure forever. It happened at the annual 4th of July barbecue. You know the kind. The air thick with citronella and condescension. My brother Mark was holding court by the grill, flipping burgers with the unearned confidence of a man who had never once paid his own car insurance. His wife Brenda was laughing a little too loudly at his jokes, a high tinkling sound that always set my teeth on edge. My father was watching him with a look of slack-jawed pride, as if Mark had just discovered fire instead of simply managing not to burn a $10 pack of frozen patties. And my mother. She was orchestrating the whole affair, flitting between the potato salad and the cooler of drinks like she was hosting a state dinner instead of a backyard get-together. Because in my family, feelings were optional, but a flawless presentation was mandatory. My daughter Lily was on the periphery. She was always on the periphery at these things. At 9 years old, she was already more observant than most adults I knew. She saw the invisible lines drawn in our family, the circles of warmth and the cold, empty spaces in between. She'd been trying all afternoon in her quiet way, offering to help carry the paper plates, showing my mother a drawing she'd made. Each attempt was met with a distracted nod, a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "That's nice, dear. Go play." I watched my daughter's shoulders slump a little more each time. I felt that familiar dull ache behind my ribs. It was the price of admission. You come, you perform your role as the dutiful daughter and granddaughter, you absorb the little slights, and you pretend it doesn't hurt. I'd been doing it for 35 years. I was starting to realize I was teaching my daughter to do the same. The final straw came after the sun had dipped below the trees, leaving the sky a bruised purple. The sparklers were coming out. Mark's kids, a pair of loud, sticky boys, were running in circles, shrieking with delight. My mother was kneeling, her face alight with a kind of adoration I had never once seen directed at me, helping the youngest light his sparkler. Lily watched them for a moment. Then she walked over to my mother, her small face hopeful. She just wanted to be included in that circle of light. She reached out, her hand hovering near my mother's arm, and said in a small voice, "Grandma, can I have a hug?" My mother recoiled. She didn't just pull back. She flinched, a full body movement of pure revulsion, as if Lily were covered in something foul. Her face, which had been so soft and loving a second before, twisted into a mask of irritation. And then she said it. Not quietly, not to the side. She said it loud enough for the conversation by the grill to falter, for the tiki torches to seem to dim. "For heaven's sake, Lily, don't touch me." The words hung in the humid air, sharp and ugly. The happy chatter died. My brother froze, spatula in hand. Brenda's smile vanished. Even the shrieking kids stopped, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. It was a silence that had weight, pressing down on all of us. But all I saw was Lily. Her hand dropped to her side. Her face, which had been so open and hopeful, just crumpled. It was like watching a flower wilt in fast motion. She didn't cry. She didn't make a sound. She just turned, her back ramrod straight, and walked over to the dark corner of the yard by the old oak tree and sat down with her back to everyone. Something inside me broke. It wasn't a loud, shattering sound. It was a quiet, final snap. The sound of a chain that had been stretched taut for decades, finally giving way. The peacemaker in me, the part that would have rushed in to smooth things over, to make excuses. "Oh, Grandma's just tired, honey. She didn't mean it." That part of me died right there on the freshly mown lawn. I looked at my mother, who was now glaring at me, as if this were my fault, as if I had somehow engineered my daughter's spontaneous request for affection just to ruin her party. Her expression was clear. "Fix this. Make your difficult child stop being difficult." I didn't say a word. I walked over to Lily, sat on the damp grass beside her, and put my arm around her. She leaned into me, her small body trembling. We sat there in the dark and listened to the party awkwardly restart around us. And I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as stone, that this was over. All of it. The trying, the hoping, the pretending. It was done. This dynamic wasn't new, you see. It was the bedrock of our family. I was the scapegoat, and my brother Mark was the golden child. It had been that way for as long as I could remember. I was the responsible one. He was the charming one. I was the quiet one. He was the life of the party. My achievements were met with a polite nod. His failures were met with a flurry of excuses and financial bailouts. I remembered being 12. I'd saved up my allowance for months to buy a telescope. I was obsessed with astronomy. I'd spend hours in the library reading about constellations and nebulae. The telescope was my prized possession. Mark, who was 14, thought it was a stupid toy. One afternoon, he and his friends were horsing around in the backyard. I heard a crash. I ran outside to find my telescope on the ground. The main lens shattered, the tube dented. Mark just shrugged. It was an accident. When I told my parents, my voice shaking with tears, my mother sighed. Well, you shouldn't have left it out where people could trip over it. It's an expensive piece of equipment. You need to be more careful. I got a lecture on responsibility. Mark got pizza with his friends. The telescope was never replaced. I learned a valuable lesson that day. My pain was an inconvenience, but Mark's comfort was a priority. It continued into adulthood. When I graduated from college, summa cum laude, the first in our family to even finish a degree, my parents threw a small dinner. My mother spent most of it talking about Mark's latest brilliant idea for a business. It was some scheme to sell artisanal, bespoke shoelaces online. It sounded ridiculous to me, but my parents were enthralled. He just has that entrepreneurial spirit, my father said, beaming. A few months later, I got a call from my mother. Her voice was strained. Honey, we need to talk. We had to dip into your college fund a little bit, just a loan, to help Mark get his business off the ground. It wasn't a college fund, it was my savings. Money I had painstakingly put away from part-time jobs since I was 16. Money that was supposed to be a down payment on a small condo. It was over $10,000. And they didn't ask, they told me. The artisanal shoelace business failed in 6 months. The money was gone. I never saw a penny of it. When I tried to bring it up, my mother got that tight, wounded look. Family helps family, she'd said, as if that ended the discussion. You're so good with money, you'll make it back. Mark takes these things so hard. I learned another lesson. My resources were communal property, but Mark's feelings were delicate treasures to be protected at all costs. I stopped talking about money with them after that. I stopped talking about anything important, really. Our relationship became a carefully curated collection of shallow pleasantries. The weather, a new recipe I'd tried. How work was fine. I stayed small. I made myself easy. I didn't make waves, because every time I tried to stand up for myself, to point out the blatant unfairness, I was the one branded as difficult, dramatic, or ungrateful. It was a form of psychological warfare, and they were masters of it. Their greatest weapon was my own deep-seated hope that one day, if I was just good enough, quiet enough, and compliant enough, they would finally see me. Having Lily changed the equation. Suddenly, it wasn't just about my own hurt. It was about this incredible little person I had brought into the world. I saw them starting the same pattern with her. Mark's boys would get lavish birthday gifts, huge checks tucked into their cards. Lily would get a $5 gift card to a bookstore and a sweater that was 2 sizes too small. Mark's kids' crayon drawings were taped to the fridge like masterpieces. Lily's detailed, beautiful sketches were glanced at and set aside on the counter, destined for the recycling bin. I tried to compensate. I became the most enthusiastic cheerleader for my daughter. I praised her art, her kindness, her clever mind. I tried to build a fortress of love around her that was strong enough to withstand the casual neglect of her grandparents. But I was also, foolishly, still trying to bridge the gap. I kept bringing her to these family functions, hoping against hope that this time would be different. That this time, they would see the amazing person she was. That night, sitting in the dark with my daughter's silent tears soaking into my shirt, I finally understood. They would never see her, because to see her, they would have to see me first. And they had made it clear time and time again that they had no interest in doing that. I had been sacrificing my daughter's well-being on the altar of a relationship that was a complete fiction. The silence on the car ride home was absolute. Lily had fallen asleep in the back, her face tear-streaked and puffy in the glow of the streetlights. I drove on autopilot, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The rage from the backyard had cooled into something else, something heavy and solid. It was resolve. For years my father had made a promise. It was about my childhood home, the small brick house on Elm Street where I'd grown up. It was the only place I had ever felt truly safe. It was my grandmother's house before it was ours. It held every good memory I had. One day, this will all be yours, he'd say, gesturing around the living room. Mark doesn't care about this old place. He wants something new and flashy. But you have roots here. It's your home. Always. It was a comforting thought, a little anchor in the turbulent sea of my family. A few years ago, after my dad had a minor heart attack, I gently brought it up. Maybe we should get some paperwork done, I'd suggested, just to make things official for the future. My mother had waved her hand dismissively. Oh, don't be so morbid. Your father is fine. It's all in the will. Don't you trust us? And like a fool, I dropped it, because questioning them was paramount to a declaration of war. It meant I didn't trust them, that I was greedy, that I was thinking about their deaths. So I'd back down, as always. But now, driving home from that disastrous barbecue, the word trust echoed in my head with a bitter, mocking ring. Trust them! How could I? They had proven in the cruelest way possible that my child's heart was worth nothing to them. What was a house compared to that? When we got home, I carried a sleeping Lily to her bed, tucked her in, and kissed her forehead. Then I went to my computer. My hands were shaking, but my mind was clear. The county property records were online. It was public information. A knot of dread and certainty tightened in my stomach. I typed in the address of the house on Elm Street. The page loaded. I scanned the ownership history. My father's name was there, and then a record from 2 years ago. Transfer of deed. I clicked on it. My heart hammered against my ribs. The property had been transferred from my parents to a newly created entity, the Miller Family Irrevocable Trust. My breath caught in my throat. A trust. That sounded official. That sounded final. I did a quick search. How do you find out who the beneficiaries of a trust are? The answer was usually that you couldn't. It was private. But sometimes the names were on the founding documents filed with the county. I clicked through the scanned pages of legalese. My eyes skimmed past clauses and articles until I found it. The schedule of beneficiaries. There were 2 names listed: Mark Miller, Brenda Miller. My name was not there. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush, as if I'd been punched. I leaned back in my chair, the screen blurring in front of my eyes. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an oversight. This was a deliberate, calculated act of erasure. They had taken my home, the one thing that had been promised to me, the symbol of my entire childhood, and had secretly given it to the son who had never wanted it. They had lied. For 2 years, they had sat across from me at holiday dinners, smiled at me, asked about my life, all while knowing they had stabbed me in the back in the most profound way possible. The promise wasn't just broken, it had been a lie all along. It was a tool to keep me compliant. A carrot dangled in front of me to make sure I kept coming back for more of their poison. The hurt was immense, a physical wave of nausea and pain that threatened to drown me. But then another feeling surfaced, pushing through the grief. It was the cold, hard resolve from the backyard, now forged into something sharper. This wasn't just an insult anymore. This wasn't just a slight. This was a weapon. They had handed me a weapon. My mind started racing. A memory surfaced. An email from my father from around that time, after his health scare. The subject line was something innocuous, like quick question. I frantically searched my email archives, typing in his name, scrolling back through years of messages, and there it was. Subject: getting our affairs in order. I opened it. It was a short message. Hi, honey. Your mother and I are setting up the trust we talked about to handle the house. The lawyer said it's the cleanest way to do it. Hope you're well. Love, Dad. The trust we talked about. I had never talked to him about a trust. I had talked about a simple will. He was lumping me into a conversation I was never a part of. But that wasn't the damning part. The damning part was my mother's reply, which he had accidentally left in the chain. He must have forwarded their conversation to me instead of starting a new message. It was a classic, careless move from my technologically challenged father. Her email, sent to him just an hour before his, was brief and brutal. Good, it's done then. She doesn't need the house anyway. She's always been so resourceful. Mark and Brenda need the stability. She can take care of herself. She can take care of herself. It wasn't a compliment. It was a condemnation. It was the justification for a lifetime of neglect. My competence wasn't a source of pride for them. It was a license to abandon me. My strength was the excuse they used to give all their support to my brother's weakness. I printed the emails. I printed the deed transfer. I printed the trust documentation. I laid the papers out on my dining room table. It was a collection of evidence, a verdict on my entire life within this family. Ink beats opinions, paper beats promises. The tears I had been holding back finally came. But they weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of rage. And with that rage came a terrifying clarity. I didn't care about their approval anymore. I didn't care about keeping the peace. Waiting for them to love me had stopped being a choice. My mother's words from the barbecue echoed in my ears. "Don't touch me!" I looked at the papers on the table, whispered, "Oh, I'm going to touch you," I said to the empty room. "I'm going to touch every part of this perfect little life you've built, and I'm going to watch it crumble." The next morning, I made a phone call. Not to my parents, who had left a series of increasingly agitated voicemails. First conciliatory, "Hope you and Lily got home okay." Then annoyed, "Are you screening our calls?" And finally, accusatory, "You always have to make everything so difficult. Your father is very upset." I deleted them without listening to the end. I called my paternal grandmother, Rose, my father's mother. Grandma Rose was 91 years old, sharp as a tack, and the only person in the family who had ever seen my mother for exactly who she was. She lived 3 states away in a sunny retirement community, but we spoke every week. She was a matriarch from a bygone era, a woman who believed in justice, loyalty, and the strategic application of a well-funded lawyer. She had never liked my mother, a fact she made little effort to hide. A marshmallow, she'd once called her. Looks soft and sweet, but there's nothing inside. She answered on the second ring, her voice crisp and clear. "Hello, dear." I didn't waste time with pleasantries. I laid it all out: the barbecue, my mother's cruel words, Lily's face, the late-night search of the county records, the secret trust, the emails. I told her everything, my voice flat and emotionless. I was past crying. I was in the cold, clear phase of action. She listened without saying a word. I could picture her in her armchair, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her gaze fixed on the golf course outside her window. When I finished, there was a long pause on the line. For a terrifying second, I wondered if I had misjudged her, if she too would tell me I was overreacting. Then she spoke, and her voice was laced with something I could only describe as chilly satisfaction. "Good," she said. "I've been waiting 40 years for your father to grow a spine. Since he clearly can't, it seems you've inherited mine instead. Now, we burn it down." Relief washed over me so intensely, my knees felt weak. I wasn't alone. I had an ally. And not just any ally, a matriarchal avenger with deep pockets and a long memory. "I have a lawyer," she continued, her tone all business. "His name is Arthur Vance. He's an absolute shark. He specializes in estate litigation. He finds loopholes in ironclad contracts for breakfast. I'm going to wire you money for his retainer. His office will call you within the hour. Send him everything you found. Don't speak to your parents. Don't speak to your brother. Don't speak to anyone. From now on, Arthur speaks for you." It was happening. It was real. The vague, vengeful thoughts from the night before were crystallizing into a concrete plan. Arthur Vance's office called 58 minutes later. His voice was exactly as I'd imagined, calm, professional, and utterly devoid of sentiment. I explained the situation again. I emailed him the documents. He said he would call me back the next day. The next 24 hours were the longest of my life. I put my phone on silent. I took Lily to the park. We got ice cream. I tried to act normal, but inside, a war was raging. A lifetime of conditioning was screaming at me to call my mother, to apologize for making a scene, to smooth it all over. But the new, colder voice in my head just kept repeating one thing. "She hurt your child. She stole your home." Arthur called back the following afternoon. "I've reviewed the documents," he said, without preamble. "The trust is sloppy. It was clearly done by a cheap general practice lawyer. That's good for us." He then explained the strategy. It was brilliant in its simplicity. "We are not going to sue them yet," he said. "A lawsuit is a negotiation. We are not negotiating." He had found 2 potential avenues of attack. First, he'd discovered something my grandmother hadn't even remembered. The original deed, from when her father had given the house to my dad, contained a specific clause about the property passing to heirs of the body. Arthur argued that putting the house into a trust with an in-law, Brenda, as a primary beneficiary, violated the spirit and possibly the letter of that original deed covenant. It was a long shot, he admitted, but it was messy. The second avenue was far more direct. He asked me about my father's health scare. I told him about the power of attorney documents he'd had me sign. He'd told me they were just in case, so I could pay his bills if he was incapacitated. I'd signed them in the hospital waiting room without a second thought. Did you know they were using that power of attorney to facilitate the transfer of assets into this trust? Arthur asked. My stomach dropped. No, of course not. Then we have a strong case for fraud and undue influence, he said calmly. They had you sign a legal instrument under false pretenses and then used it to strip you of a promised inheritance. A district attorney might be very interested in that story, especially the email from your mother. It establishes intent. The plan was this. We would set the stage for a confrontation. Arthur would draft a settlement agreement. The terms would be non-negotiable. They would dissolve the trust and sign the deed of the house on Elm Street over to me, free and clear. They would also sign a legally binding no-contact agreement covering both me and Lily. In exchange, I would agree not to pursue criminal charges or a civil suit. We need to deliver this in person, Arthur said, in a setting where they feel comfortable, where their guard is down, a place where a public scene would be their worst nightmare. A cold smile touched my lips. I know just the place, I said. Thanksgiving dinner. For the next 2 months, I was a ghost. I communicated with my family only through brief, non-committal texts. Lily and I are fine, just busy. I let their calls go to voicemail. The messages became a predictable cycle of confusion, anger, and finally, manipulative pity. Your father is so worried, my mother's voice would plead. You're tearing this family apart over one little misunderstanding. Aunt Carol, my mother's sister, and Chief Flying Monkey started calling too. Your mother is a wreck, she'd say, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. Whatever is going on, you need to be the bigger person and apologize. Apologize. The word was so absurd, it was almost funny. Apologize for what? For having my daughter's heart broken? For having my inheritance stolen? For finally refusing to light myself on fire to keep them warm? The week before Thanksgiving, I finally responded to my mother's text asking if Lily and I would be there. Yes, I wrote, we'll be there. Her reply was instant. Oh, wonderful! I knew you'd come around. We can't wait to see you both. I could feel the smug satisfaction radiating through the phone. She thought she'd won. She thought my silence was me pouting, and now I was coming back, tail between my legs, ready to resume my role in their dysfunctional play. She had no idea she was setting the table for her own execution. Thanksgiving Day dawned gray and cold. I dressed myself and Lily in nice but unremarkable clothes. You don't need armor, you need dignity. Lily was quiet, sensing the tension. Do we have to go, Mommy? She asked, her big eyes worried. I knelt down and took her small hands in mine. Yes, honey, we do, but this is the last time, I promise. After today, we are never going back there. You and I are going to be a team today, okay? I need you to be brave for a little while longer. She nodded, her expression serious. Okay, Mommy, a team. We arrived precisely on time. Grandma Rose had flown in the day before, a surprise I had not mentioned to my parents. She was staying with me. We walked up to the front door of my parents' new, sterile condo together. The house on Elm Street sat empty, as Mark and Brenda were in the process of moving in after a lengthy and expensive renovation my parents had funded. My mother opened the door, her face arranged in a welcoming smile that faltered when she saw Grandma Rose standing behind me. Mother Miller, she said, her voice a little too bright. What a surprise. Hello, Eleanor, Grandma Rose said, her tone as frosty as the November air. She swept past her into the living room without another word. The atmosphere was already thick with unspoken questions. Mark and Brenda were there, looking smug. Aunt Carol was fussing in the kitchen. My father gave me a hesitant, hopeful look. Glad you could make it, he mumbled. My mother pulled me toward the kitchen. I'm so glad you decided to be reasonable, she whispered conspiratorially. I hope you've spoken to Lily about having a better attitude. I just looked at her. I didn't smile. I didn't argue. I let my silence hang in the air between us, a strange and powerful new weapon. She faltered, unnerved, and bustled away to check on the turkey. We sat down to dinner. The table was laden with all the traditional foods, a perfect picture of family harmony. It was a lie. Every dish, every carefully folded napkin was a lie. My father, at the head of the table, cleared his throat to make his annual toast. He raised his glass. "I'd like to give thanks for family," he said, pointedly looking at me. "Sometimes we have our disagreements, but in the end, family is all that matters. To family." "To family," everyone echoed. I did not raise my glass. After a few minutes of strained small talk, Grandma Rose set her fork down with a delicate clink. The sound cut through the chatter. All eyes turned to her. "Charles," she said, looking at my father, "I've been thinking a lot about promises lately, about legacy, about the home your father left to you, the home I raised you in. He always said that house was meant to be a foundation for our family, passed down through the bloodline." My father shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, Mother, it is." "Is it?" she asked, her voice dangerously soft. That was my cue. I reached into my bag and pulled out a simple manila folder. I placed it on the table. The sound it made on the polished wood was unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. I looked directly at my father. "You promised me my home," I said, my voice steady and clear. "You told me my entire life that the house on Elm Street would be mine. Instead, you gave it to Mark, secretly." I slid the folder across the table toward him. Mark snorted. "Oh, here we go. Can't you just have one holiday without drama?" Brenda rolled her eyes. "It's for tax purposes, for God's sake. You are going to be taken care of. You're always so dramatic." My mother jumped in, her voice rising. "We were going to tell you. It was a temporary arrangement." "You are ruining Thanksgiving!" My father, to his credit, looked pale. He opened the folder. He saw the copy of the deed transfer. He saw the trust documents with Mark and Brenda's names. And then he saw the printed email chain with my mother's cold, dismissive words highlighted in yellow. "She can take care of herself." He looked from the paper to my mother, and for the first time in my life, I saw a flicker of something other than blind adoration in his eyes. It looked like betrayal. "Eleanor," he whispered, "what is this?" Before she could answer, the doorbell rang. "I'll get it," I said, standing up. I opened the door to Arthur Vance. He was dressed in a sharp suit, holding a briefcase. He looked completely out of place, and it was perfect. I led him into the dining room. "Everyone," I said, "this is Arthur Vance. He's my lawyer." If my father had been pale before, he was now the color of ash. Mark's smug expression had vanished, replaced by confusion. My mother's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The pale face moment. It was even more satisfying than I had imagined. Arthur didn't sit. He stood at the end of the table like a judge. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice filling the room. "I'm here to present a settlement offer on behalf of my client." He opened his briefcase and produced a sheaf of papers, placing them in front of my father. "This document outlines the terms," Arthur said calmly. "You will dissolve the Miller Family Irrevocable Trust immediately. You will sign the quitclaim deed transferring the property at 412 Elm Street to my client. You will also sign the attached no-contact agreement. In return, my client will not pursue criminal charges against you for fraudulent use of a power of attorney and undue influence." He paused, letting the words land. "I have a notary with me, waiting in the car. You can sign this today. Or, my office will file the civil suit and a formal complaint with the district attorney's office at 9 a.m. tomorrow morning." The silence that followed was absolute. The smell of roasted turkey and pumpkin pie suddenly seemed nauseating. My mother finally found her voice. It was a strangled shriek. "You wouldn't! We're your family! You would destroy your own father over a house?" I looked at her, my expression empty of all the emotions she expected. There was no anger, no tears, no pleading. There was nothing. "You destroyed this," I said quietly. "You did this when you taught me that my brother's wants were more important than my needs. You did this when you stole my savings. You did this when you screamed at my daughter for wanting a hug. The house is just the paperwork to prove it." Aunt Carol started to chime in, something about forgiveness and letting things go. Grandma Rose cut her off with a look so withering it could have frozen lava. "Be quiet, Carol. The adults are talking." Mark was staring at the papers, then at his parents. "Is this true? The lawyer stuff?" The bravado was gone. He just looked like a scared little boy. My father wouldn't look at me. He stared at the papers, his hands trembling. He knew. He knew they were caught. Their reputation in their small community, their carefully constructed image of a perfect family, was about to be shattered. A public lawsuit, accusations of fraud against their own daughter. It was unthinkable. He looked at my mother. Eleanor, did you use the POA for this? My mother's face was a mess of fury and panic. We were protecting our assets. We were protecting Mark's future. And what about her future? My father asked, his voice barely a whisper, finally asking the right question 35 years too late. There was no answer. I looked at Lily, who was sitting beside me, watching everything with wide, serious eyes. She held my hand under the table, her small fingers clutching mine. She wasn't scared. She was watching me set a boundary. She was watching me protect her. She was learning that you do not have to accept cruelty just because it's disguised as family. You have 1 hour to decide, Arthur said, checking his watch. I'll be in my car. He gave a slight nod and left. Of course, they signed. It didn't even take an hour. Their comfort, their reputation, was always more important than their pride. The notary came in, pen scratched against paper, the sound of my chains breaking. We didn't stay for dessert. Grandma Rose, Lily, and I stood up from the table. I looked at my parents and my brother one last time. They weren't my family anymore. They were just people I used to know, strangers with familiar faces. Goodbye, I said, and I meant it. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Mark and Brenda, who had already been living in the house on Elm Street temporarily during their parent-funded renovation, were forced to move out. Their fury was incandescent. I got a string of unhinged texts from Brenda, calling me every name in the book. I blocked her number. My parents had to sell their condo to help Mark afford a down payment on a much smaller, shabbier house across town. The story got out, as stories do in small towns. The version they told, of course, was heavily sanitized, a simple family disagreement over the estate. But people talk. People notice when a family suddenly fractures. Their social circle shrank. Invitations to dinner parties dried up. Their perfect image was irrevocably cracked. They got what they valued most, and then they lost it. I got the house. The first thing I did was hire a crew to undo all of Mark and Brenda's tacky renovations. We took it down to the studs. We painted over the bad memories. Lily chose a bright, sunny yellow for her bedroom. We planted a garden in the backyard where the old oak tree stood, the same spot where she had sat, heartbroken, on the 4th of July. Life became quiet, peaceful. Sometimes I felt a phantom limb of anxiety, the old habit of waiting for the next passive-aggressive comment, the next casual cruelty. But it would fade. The silence in my new home wasn't empty. It was full of peace. My daughter blossomed. Without the constant, low-level stress of navigating my family, she became more confident, more outgoing. Her laughter filled the halls of the house that was now truly, legally, and spiritually ours. One afternoon, about a year later, I was watching her from the kitchen window. She was in the backyard, chasing butterflies, her yellow dress bright against the green grass. She was so completely, unselfconsciously happy. The weight I had carried for my entire life, the weight of trying to be enough for people who would never see me, was just gone. I hadn't gotten an apology. I hadn't gotten remorse. I had gotten something so much better. I had gotten justice. I had gotten my daughter's childhood back, and I had gotten myself back. So what do you think? Did I go too far or not far enough? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more.